Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erenst Anip, and I would like to welcome you all to our first LDTC workshop. I am the co-director, as Stephanie mentioned, and I've been here for quite a while. And I guess since I refused to leave the program, they updated me to mentor and then eventually as co-director now. Like you guys, actually, I'm from the participant side. I don't have any linguistic training. My training comes from attending LDTC workshop for so long. So I can see the workshop from more of the participant side. And I will be going through some intro about LDTC and the workshop requirements. So what is LDTC? It's a workshop, basically 8 weeks of meetings, 2 hours a week. And we began in 2004. I wasn't here yet. But this is a completely student-run program by the linguistics department. And I started joining LDTC in fall 2006. So it was still in the early stage, and things might be a little bit different back then. And as you can see, the goal here is to train native speakers or heritage language speakers like you and me to document our own language and culture, so that the goal here is not just to do this workshop one time and then that's it. Here's my contribution and put it up on the web, but to this is the beginning, so that we can go back to our community and then help document the culture and language that we have back home, preserve it, and hopefully we can maintain it or even revitalize it if it's endangered. And up to now, or up to before you guys, we have 100 participants. And 88 plus languages were documented during that time. Some languages have several participants documenting it. These are more bigger languages like Javanese in Indonesia. We have like 5 people doing it, and other languages too. And we here in the workshop, we try to pair you up, the participants, with mentors. And normally we do it one-on-one. And if sometimes, like this semester, we might have 2-on-1 because we have more mentors than participants, if that's correct. Yes. And as you can see, we'll be meeting here, listening to lectures about different linguistic concepts and techniques. And then we'll be working in pairs or in threes and working on our own language. And here are the requirements for the basic workshop, which you are in. First of all, you need to finish up all these pages, just 6 basic pages of website within a website. And it starts with about me and my language. And then secondly, we have orthography or writing system. If you already have one, it might be easier to put it up, but we can also help you create one for your language. We also require you to create a basic word list. It's about 200, 150 word list that encompasses basic words that is found throughout languages around the world. And we'll also teach you about recording and then transcribing, translating those recording. It can be a song, a story, you can sing it. You can narrate a story, or you can ask people back home to help you with that too. And then we'll have a page where you can transcribe it and then translate it to English. We will also expose you a little bit to dictionary making, and we only require you to have about 25 entries in your language. And we have also a more linguistic concept of syntax and morphology, like different minimal pairs and yes or no question, how you say questions, the WH and how questions. And those are the requirements for the basic workshop in terms of pages or products that you need to come up with. Other than that, we require you to attend at least 6 workshops. Out of what we have is 8. So we give you 2 absence. Hopefully, please tell us first, so if you need to be absent, so that we can inform your mentors so that they can plan accordingly, and we can plan accordingly too. So those are the requirements that are needed at the end of the workshop. Any question? So what are the goals for our participants? Like I mentioned, is to train you guys to be to document your own language. You'll get the general introduction to the issue of language endangerment across the world. There's always that quote that a language dies every 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, and that's always been the mantra for language documentation efforts, so keep that in mind. We are also training you to think about your own language and how it fits to the language vitality within the bigger linguistic world. And also we will teach you different basic levels of understanding in linguistic. We're not here to teach you the whole linguistic concept that would take a semester, a class, or even a PhD for some people. So, lastly, we want you to be able to apply those skills and techniques and knowledge back in your own linguistic situation, back home in your community. And hopefully that can make the world a better place. Wow. I know it's a bit big. Yes. We have big dreams. We start small. Other activities, we have some social activities too. In week 4 or 5? 4. We have a midterm social or midterm evaluation. Basically, it's event where you get together and just come and have some food and talk amongst each other, get to know the other participants and the other mentors. Because you'll be working with your own partner during the workshop, so this is a chance to get to know the other participants and mentors better. And of course, food is provided. And as you can see, food is always our consistent theme here. And that would also be the case for the closing ceremony. So after the 8-week workshop, you will also have to present your project, just a short 5-minute presentation about what you've done, about your language, and how cool is your language, because I sang and then I created this poem in this language, or whatever you have come up with. And then after the closing ceremony, we give you a certificate and everything after you completed the workshop. We will have food, of course, and have fun. Like you can see, you probably noticed some of the familiar faces from Hale Manoa. So those are our activities, and depending on the semester, we also go out and do outreach and talk to the people, the public, about language endangerment, about your own language, and tell it to people in Hawaii, because they might not know, oh, where is Indonesia, or what language is it that you speak? Is it a kind of food instead? So this is a picture from our last outreach to at the Manoa Experience Day. It's the open house for the university, and at the same time we're having celebration for the International Mother Language Day. So that's a perfect time for us to go out there and talk to people about the different languages.
Yeah.
That's my part, and I will turn it over to Stephanie, who will discuss more on the issue of language endangerment.
Yeah, thank you, Erenst. Erenst just gave an overview of some of the things we do. It's workshops here, but it's also really social and really fun. And for those of you who don't know, next semester, our linguistics department has a big conference, and people come from all over the states, and they come from other countries even. And so we're going to play an important role in that next conference. And so I hope you guys will stay with us and join us then as well. Thanks, Sean. So, okay, this is supposed to come in increments. Anyways, how many languages do you think exist in the world?
7,000.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's 7,000. For some people, that's a really striking number. They wouldn't have guessed there were that many languages in the world. Maybe you guys are experts and you would have already guessed. But that's a lot of languages. And linguists estimate, there's quite a few estimates, but they estimate that anywhere between 50% to 90% of the world's languages will become extinct in the next century. So if you can imagine, the year is 2112, and I'm giving this exact same workshop, and I ask you how many languages exist in the world, but the correct answer is now 3,500. Quite a drop, right? It's a really big problem. And according to the Index of Linguistic Diversity at Terralingua, linguists have estimated that global linguistic diversity has already declined by at least 20% since 1970. So in 40 years, already 20% of our linguistic diversity, how many languages there are in the world, has already declined pretty drastically. Other estimates, while we're talking about language endangerment, is that 96% of all the languages, or of the world's population, so 96% of all the people in the world speak just 4% of the languages in the world. And that's kind of a weird figure to think about, right? What's 96%, what's 4%? So I created this image. If you could imagine, right, this is the world, and the continents were little triangles, right? So if you can imagine that this is the world, and we grouped up all of the languages in the world. 4% would be spoken by this blue part. That's 96% of the world's population. They would only speak 4% of the world's languages. And then there would be 96% of the world's languages, the majority, spoken by just this little sliver of people. Kind of scary, right? But how quickly those languages can disappear when there's not very many people speaking them. And they are disappearing. And that's something we in this department and we as students feel very passionately about. And that's why we think that it's important to document languages. But why should you think it's so important? Why should you try to document your language? I'm going to give you a couple reasons why people think it's important. Hopefully you can think of your own reasons why it might be important to document your language. Language is a very valuable cultural asset. Every language gives a unique insight into the society's culture and understanding of its environment. So if you can think about your own language, think about words you might have for things like plants or fish. Think about words you might have that are unique to just your culture, your family, or how you grew up. If you were to lose that language, you would probably lose that way of describing your world, of your culture, and your community. Languages describe a society's worldviews. Think about stories or songs you might have heard growing up in your language. Even something like a song can really describe the values in your community, the values among your family members. And language does that. Learning more about your language allows you to reconnect with older generations. It's usually the case that it's older generations, older people who hold on to the native language, the heritage language that's disappearing. It tends to be younger people who want to adopt a more dominant language. So think about what would happen if younger people adopted the heritage language. They'd be able to better communicate with those older generations. Language can reveal a lot about the past, about your ancestors, about your grandparents, right? Because they use the same language. Think about stories that have been passed down. Nobody even knows where the stories came from. That's information about your past that language holds. If the language doesn't have very much documentation, if people haven't written it down, they don't know how the language works, and then it disappeared, it's as though it never existed. It's almost impossible to revive this language and to retrieve it and to learn from it and to get back those stories or those songs or the description of plants. It's almost impossible. So that's why we think it's important to document your language. So, the activity we're going to do today, we're going to have you guys think a little bit more about your language and figure out where you think it fits into this conversation we just had about language endangerment. So, you're going to be matched up with your mentors today. I'm going to give you a handout. You're going to complete pages 3 to 4 of it. That'll make sense when you get your handout. We're going to have you assess your language's vitality. So how strong do you think your language is? How many people do you think speak it and where do they speak it. We're going to have you assess that as you have observed it in your community. To do this, we're going to be using the Endangered Languages Project measurement tool called a rubric. So right now I'd like to invite Sean Simpson to come up and talk about the Endangered Languages Project and the tool that you will be using to assess your language.
Nothing to stand behind. All right, so now that we've talked just a little bit about the general problem of language endangerment, like Stephanie said, we want to get you thinking about where your language fits into the general scheme of things, right? How endangered your language is said to be by other people and how endangered you would rate your own language to be. So, on the question of rating endangerment of languages, it's an odd concept, right? I mean, you can say, this language is endangered. Well, how endangered? How do you know? When does it become endangered? When does it transfer from safe to endangered? What criteria? So, the tool that most linguists use to kind of determine this is a rubric. That's what we're going to be using today. And since the Endangered Languages Project is a collaborative effort between the University of Hawaii and Google, we're going to be using that rubric. So, what is the Endangered Languages Project? Basically, the concept is that it's a repository of all the world's knowledge on endangered languages. So if you want to know anything about endangered languages, you go to this website and you have the most current, up-to-date, accurate information. That's the concept. There are a lot of different websites with this concept. So Ethnologue is one, UNESCO, what's it called? Atlas, Italia, the UNESCO Atlas of the World's Languages Endangered. But they all have problems, and not all of them are complete, and not all of them rate language endangerment the same way. So what kind of information do these things collect? Well, we collect classification information, vitality stats, GPS coordinates, and video, audio, and textual samples. But what we're interested in today is getting you thinking about how endangered your language really is. So that's the vitality assessment, right? So what vitality means is basically the higher the vitality, the safer your language, right? So a language that's totally safe, say English, high vitality. A language that has one speaker left, maybe 80, 90 years, low vitality. So, how do we go about assessing this vitality? Well, this is what I was talking about. The ELP, which is the Endangered Languages Project, and all other similar institutions use a specific rubric to score. These rubrics are based on certain categories, right? So one might be intergenerational transmission, or domains of use, or speaker number. And we give a numeric score to each category, and then once you've scored a language in each category, there's a specific calculation that goes into play to determine sort of an index of endangerment. So why do we do this? Why do linguists use rubrics? Sort of the best answer for this is that it's the most quantitative way to assign language vitality. So you're giving a numerical score. You're not looking at it and saying, is it, is it not? It kind of is. I think so. Let's do this. And it ensures uniformity across all languages that are rated with the same rubric. So you can really, it's a good comparison tool. But there are problems, like I said. There are problems with all vitality rubrics. The most common problem that we run into is the categories themselves, right? So languages aren't neatly packaged little things. They're messy, because people are messy. So, but rubrics are not designed to handle messiness. I mean, we try to handle messiness as much as we can, but it's not going to work out. Invariably, you're going to get languages that don't fit neatly into the categories that have been established for the rubric. And so this means that rubric scores make judgment calls a lot of the time. So when I say it's quantitative, take that with a grain of salt. It's also a little qualitative because you've got the judgment calls of whoever rates it coming in. Another problem is that, so rubrics have anywhere from like 4 to, I think eGates has 9 main ones and maybe 14 sub ones, categories I'm talking about. And oftentimes information is not available for all of these categories. You're only going to get information for maybe speaker number and say intergenerational transmission or something like that. So based on these 2 categories out of the total that you have, you're supposed to try to come up with this rating and then compare it to languages who have information for all these categories. So that's a problem. And like I said, in general, numerical rubrics are never going to be able to capture the uniqueness, really, of each language situation. It's just not going to happen. But we approximate it the best we can. So this is the rubric we use for the Endangered Languages project. It's got 4 categories that we rate in. So domains of use, speaker trends, absolute number, and intergenerational transmission. Let me just say a bit about each category. So intergenerational transmission is the rate with which the language is passed on from parent to child, right? So if all the adults in a community speak a language, but children don't, that's low intergenerational transmission, right? It's not passing on from generation to the next. Absolute speaker number is pretty obvious. That's just the number of speaker numbers, or the number of speakers. Speaker number trends is the trajectory that we see for the different speaker numbers. So is it staying stable? Is it slowly decreasing? Is it sharply decreasing? And then domains of language use. So this is actually a complicated category, and it kind of comprises a couple. So domains can be either physical, so is it spoken in the schools, in the homes, in the churches, in the marketplace? And it's also social, right? So is it spoken, what registers or particular social interactions that you use with? Do you use it, is it the language of ritual, like Latin, right? Latin's only used basically in the churches. Is it only used in the homes but not in the schools? That's more, that's the location that I was talking about. But would you use it with an elder? Would you use it young person to young person? Would you use it in formal situations? Is it only informally used? Things like that. So each category has a scale from 0 to 5, right? So 0 is completely safe. 5 is critically endangered. And we give just a general description of sort of the bins that you fit a language into. Now, just looking at this rubric, we can already see some of the problems that I was talking about with vitality assessment, right? So, straight away, so number 2, on intergenerational transmission, most adults of childbearing age speak the language. Number 3, some of childbearing age know the language, but do not speak it to children. This doesn't capture all situations because a lot of times, not a lot of times, but some of the times, you're not going to have 50% of the adults that speak it and 10% of the kids. Of course, you will sometimes. But there are also situations in which you've got a small segment of the population, say 10% of adults, speaking it. But their children also speak it. So intergenerational transmission is high, right? Everybody who speaks it is passing it on. It's just a small segment of the population. That's something this rubric doesn't capture very well. There are a few things like that. So domains of use, too. Lumped in here is literacy. So talk about number 3 for domains of use. So used mainly just in the home. Some speakers may value their language, but many are indifferent. No literacy or educational programs. So a language that's just spoken in the home, yet has high literacy, what do you do with it? That's what I was talking about. You make judgment calls. So part of what we want you to do here is get to know your language better. A big part of it also is understanding the problems with how other people have rated it and understanding where they're coming from and the different things they're looking at when they do rate it so that you know a little bit more of the back end of things, right? And so making these calls is going to help with that. So once you rate your language in all 4 categories on the 0 to 5 scale, there's an equation. So it's basically you add up all the scores and divide by the total number. But intergenerational transmission is thought by many linguists, we at the Endangered Languages Project think, that it's one of the most important things in terms of rating vitality. It carries a lot of weight, so we multiply by 2. So you're going to get your intergenerational transmission multiplied by 2. Well, I'll give you examples later. Add up all the others and then divide by the total possible number of points. And then the percentage you get is going to correlate, right? So if you score 0s all across the board, that's safe, that's good. You're going to get 0 over 25, which is 0, and you're safe. We at the Endangered Languages Project also have a level of certainty included, which not a lot of other people do. what this is basically this is an attempt to capture what I was talking about before. Like you've only got info for 2 categories. Well, you're going to get a vitality rating, but how reliable is it? So this is a way to try to capture that. Basically, the level of certainty is the amount of possible points you have divided by 25, which is if you had information for all your speakers, right? Or for all your categories. So if you've only got information for intergenerational transmission and speaker number, that's 10 points for intergenerational transmission, 5 for speaker number, so 15 over 25. Yeah, so that's a fairly certain, no, that's not true. These are supposed to be percentages, not points. So this thing is wrong. But I'll try to put up the correct one when you're actually doing it. And you don't have to do it. Most of you, I think, are going to be able to make a guess for all of the different categories, so you probably won't have to worry about this, but just something to keep in mind. So here are a few examples. So say language A scored 3 for intergenerational transmission. You multiply by 2, that's 6. And then you add up that and all of the other scores. And because you have scores for all of these, the total possible number of points is 25. So you divide 16 by 25, you get 64%, and you get severely endangered. If you've got a situation like language C, you don't know any information about intergenerational transmission, speaker trends, or domains, but you know absolute speaker number, and it's rated as a 3. So there you're going to take your absolute speaker number and divide it by 5, because you've only got information for this category, right? So it's unfair to divide it by 25 because you don't know what all these are, right? So that's that, and of course it gets a rating of uncertain because it's only 5 total possible points. And this will make more sense as you do it too, and you're going to work with your mentors, and you'll work through it. It'll make sense. All right.
Okay. We promise that's the only math that we'll have in this workshop from now on.
I didn't know we had math.
So, no more math. So thank you for your wonderful attention. We are going to stop talking. We've been talking for a while, and now we're going to move on to our first activity of this workshop, which is where you get to meet your mentors.